Careful, you pull the blanket up to your chin. The room is cool, maybe 65 degrees, and without that layer of fabric, you would toss and turn all night uncomfortable and half awake. This feels like an obvious human need, something as basic as food or water. But your ancestors, for the vast majority of human history, slept without blankets at all. No woven fabric, no down comforters, often no walls between them and the open night air. Careful, so how did they survive nights that would leave you shivering within minutes? And what does the answer reveal about a version of your own body that has quietly gone dormant? Start with the assumption you're probably making right now, because it is almost certainly incomplete. You likely picture early humans huddled miserably through cold nights, barely surviving until sunrise. Careful, but researchers studying human thermoregulation, the body's system for maintaining a stable internal temperature, have found something that complicates this picture significantly. The human body used to be considerably better at handling cold exposure than it typically is today, and the reason has almost nothing to do with willpower or toughness. This is where a concept called brown fat becomes essential to understanding the whole story. Careful, unlike the white fat most people think of when they hear the word, brown fat is metabolically active tissue specifically designed to generate heat by burning energy rather than simply storing it. Researchers studying human physiology, including work published by scientists at institutions studying cold adaptation, have found that regular exposure to cool temperatures increases the amount and activity of brown fat in the human body. This is not a fixed trait you either have or do not have. Careful, it is a responsive system, one that expands and strengthens with use, much like a muscle. Here's where it gets interesting. Modern humans living in consistently temperature-controlled homes, offices, and cars rarely experience the kind of regular cold exposure that would activate and maintain robust brown fat reserves. Careful, your ancestors, sleeping without blankets in open-air shelters or shallow caves, were essentially in a state of continuous low-level cold training every single night for their entire lives. Their bodies were not fighting the cold the way yours would. Their bodies had been shaped by it gradually into something considerably more resilient. Consider what this means for a specific mechanism inside your body right now, one you likely never think about. Vasoconstriction. Careful, when you get cold, blood vessels near your skin's surface narrow, redirecting blood flow toward your core to protect vital organs. Researchers studying cold acclimatization, including studies conducted on populations regularly exposed to cold environments, have found that people who experience frequent cold exposure develop a faster, more efficient vasoconstriction response, along with improved circulation to the extremities once the initial cold shock passes. Careful, this is not a difference in raw biology between you and your ancestors. It is a difference in what your specific body has been trained or not trained to do. There is also the simple matter of behavior, and this part is easy to overlook because it seems almost too obvious. Early humans were rarely sleeping completely exposed to open air. Careful, archaeological evidence from sites across multiple continents shows extensive use of natural windbreaks, rock overhangs, dense vegetation, and carefully chosen sleeping locations that provided meaningful protection from wind, chill, even without constructed walls. Careful, anthropologist Richard Wrangham, who has studied the behavioral ecology of early humans extensively, has noted that site selection for sleeping and resting was a deliberate learned skill passed down through generations, not a matter of simply lying down wherever exhaustion struck. This reframes an important part of the question. Ancient humans were not simply enduring the cold through sheer biological toughness. Careful, they were actively managing their environment, using accumulated practical knowledge, choosing locations that minimized exposure long before any concept of architecture existed. Fire changes this story significantly, and it is worth pausing on exactly how much. Once early humans controlled fire reliably, likely somewhere between 400,000 years ago and possibly much earlier, according to ongoing archaeological research, sleeping arrangements shifted considerably. Careful, a fire maintained through the night provided direct radiant heat, and multiple bodies sleeping close together around that fire created a shared warmth system considerably more effective than any single blanket could achieve alone. This points toward something easy to miss if you're only thinking about individual biology. Ancient humans were not sleeping cold and alone. They were sleeping in groups, often in physical contact with each other, sharing body heat as a coordinated communal strategy. Careful, researchers studying primate sleeping behaviors, including observations of how closely related species like chimpanzees and bonobos sleep in physical contact within social groups, suggest this kind of communal warmth sharing likely has deep evolutionary roots, extending well before modern humans existed at all. Picture what this actually looked like. Careful, not isolated individuals fighting the cold through raw endurance, but tightly clustered groups, bodies pressed together, fire crackling nearby, generating a combined heat output that no single person's biology needed to handle alone. The blanket you rely on tonight is, in a very real sense, a privatized, individualized replacement for something that used to be inherently social. Careful. This is where the counterintuitive twist becomes clear, and it changes how you should think about your own relationship with cold. Your ancestors were not simply tougher than you in some vague general sense. Careful, their bodies were shaped by consistent environmental pressure into genuinely different physiological defaults. Defaults your body likely still has the latent capacity for, but rarely gets the chance to develop because modern life has almost entirely eliminated regular cold exposure from daily experience. Careful researchers studying modern cold exposure protocols, including work associated with physiology Wim Hof and subsequent controlled scientific studies on cold adaptation, have found that relatively brief repeated exposure to cold temperatures in modern subjects can meaningfully increase brown fat activity and improve cold tolerance within a matter of weeks. This suggests something important. The capacity your ancestors relied upon has not disappeared from human biology entirely. Careful, it has simply gone dormant from disuse. The way any adaptive system weakens when it is no longer regularly demanded by the environment. Think about what this reveals about the broader relationship between comfort and capability. Modern convenience did not just change what you sleep under, it fundamentally altered a physiological system that used to be actively maintained through daily environmental interaction. Your blanket is not simply a comfort item. Careful, it is in a sense a technology that allowed your body to stop doing something it used to do automatically every single night for hundreds of thousands of years. There's something worth sitting with in this realization. The discomfort you would likely feel sleeping without a blanket tonight is not evidence that early humans were simply built differently at some fundamental genetic level. Careful, it is evidence of how quickly and how completely a physiological capacity can fade once the environmental pressure that maintained it disappears. Your body has not lost the ability to adapt. It has simply never been asked to. There's another dimension to this worth examining closely, and it concerns sleep itself, not just the temperature surrounding it. Careful researchers studying sleep architecture, the structure and pattern of different sleep stages throughout the night, have found that ambient temperature significantly influences sleep quality, and that humans sleeping in slightly cooler conditions often experience deeper, more restorative sleep than those in overheated environments. This creates a strange paradox worth sitting with. Careful, your ancestors sleeping without blankets in genuinely cool conditions may have been experiencing something closer to biologically optimal sleep temperature than you typically achieve tonight, buried under layers of insulating fabric in a climate-controlled room. Careful, sleep scientists studying this phenomenon have found that core body temperature naturally drops as part of the process of falling asleep, and that environments supporting this natural cooling process tend to produce more consistent, higher quality rest. This adds an unexpected layer to the entire question. It is tempting to assume that modern comfort represents a straightforward improvement over ancient conditions in every measurable way. Careful, but the relationship between temperature and sleep quality suggests something more complicated. In some respects, the environment your body evolved to sleep in, cooler, more variable, less artificially controlled, may still be closer to what your physiology is actually optimized for, even if it feels less comfortable in the moment, based on modern expectations shaped by decades of heated bedrooms and heavy blankets. Careful, there's also a psychological dimension worth considering, one connected to how humans experience discomfort itself. Modern life has dramatically shifted your baseline expectations for what counts as acceptable physical sensation. Careful researchers studying comfort and habituation have found that repeated exposure to a stable, controlled environment gradually recalibrates your subjective sense of what feels tolerable, meaning conditions your ancestors would have considered completely unremarkable might genuinely feel distressing to you now. Not because your body cannot handle them, but because your baseline expectation has shifted so dramatically toward constant, controlled comfort. Careful, this recalibration happens gradually and largely outside conscious awareness, which is part of why sleeping without a blanket tonight would likely feel far more uncomfortable to you than it would have felt to someone living even a few generations ago, let alone tens of thousands of years in the past. Careful, there's also a broader evolutionary question worth considering, one that connects sleeping without blankets to the wider story of how humans conquered environments their bodies were not initially built for. Early humans migrating out of warmer African climates into significantly colder regions faced an obvious problem, one that could not be solved by biology alone within a single generation. Careful researchers studying human migration patterns and cold adaptation have proposed that a combination of behavioral innovation, fire use, strategic shelter selection, clothing made from animal hides, and genuine physiological adaptation over many generations allowed populations to gradually establish themselves in environments that would have been lethal to earlier, less prepared ancestors. This was never a single solution. Careful, it was a layered system, biology, behavior, and technology reinforcing each other simultaneously, each compensating for gaps the others could not fully close on their own. This layered approach reveals something important about how you should think about human adaptation more generally. It was rarely just genetics, and it was rarely just tools. Careful early clothing likely developed tens of thousands of years before recorded history, using processed animal hides and early sewing technology. Worked alongside physiological, cold adaptation, and behavioral strategies like fire management and shelter selection, creating overlapping layers of protection, remove any single layer, and the others compensated to some degree. Careful, modern blankets and heated homes represent an extreme version of just one-layer technological insulation, scaled up so dramatically that it has effectively made the other layers, physiological and behavioral, almost entirely unnecessary for daily survival. On a cool night, consider what that motion actually represents. Careful, not a basic, unchangeable human need, but the endpoint of a very long process. One that began with bodies trained by nightly cold exposure, refined through careful site selection and shared fire, and eventually replaced almost entirely by a single piece of fabric doing the work that your ancestors' physiology, environment, and community used to do together. The blanket did not just make you more comfortable. Careful, it made an entire ancient system, one your body still carries the blueprint for quietly unnecessary.